Hello and welcome to Insane Planes You've Never Heard of. Today we're going to be talking about the Doriner Do 335. I'm just going to be kind of rambling and explaining my capstone research so far. The biggest feature of the airplane is the fact that it has two engines, one in front of the other. Now, normally two-engine aircraft would have two engines worked into the wings at either side of the cockpit, and the fuselage would be in the middle. But the Germans wanted to create an incredibly fast and agile airplane that would be a heavy fighter for their air force. So they decided that they would take both of the engines, and instead of working them into the wings, they'd work them both into the fuselage. They would have one in the front that would pull the aircraft forward and one in the back that would push the aircraft. This would mean that you wouldn't have as much drag as having both engines worked into the wings. Now, if you had both of them in the wings, that's two propeller surfaces that are basically blocking the air from flowing over the wings. It creates a ton of drag that's not good for speed. But the Germans thought, well, if we put both of them in the fuselage, one in front of the other, we'll only have as much drag as if the plane had one propeller. So we'll have twice as much thrust, but we're only generating half as much drag. So, as a result, the Doriner Do 335 is what resulted from it. The plane had a couple noticeable features in it. The first is the inclusion of an ejector seat, which is an incredibly advanced concept at the time. Not a lot of almost no American fighters in World War II had them. The Germans were the inventors of the ejector seat, so of course they wanted to work them all into their designs, especially late war when a lot of their pilots had been shot down. They wanted to get as many people back as possible. So as a result, the Doriner Do 335 had an ejector seat worked into it. In addition, they had a small explosive in the tail, which would blow off the tail and the rear propeller, allowing the pilot to bail out safely, because they were worried about them hopping out of the cockpit or being blown out of the cockpit and then hitting the tail and the spinning prop at the rear end of the plane. So they figured we can just jettison those in the event of an emergency since the plane's already lost, and then we can increase the chances of survival for the pilot. Another cool thing about it when just talking about damage is the fact that it could take punishment because the engines were one in front of the other. Now, in a two-engine plane, if you were to lose one, it'd start to yaw really far to one side because one engine would be speeding up while the other is completely dead. So you'd have all your thrust on one side of your airplane. But the Doriner had the added benefit of if one of the engines goes down, because they're one in front of the other, you don't really lose, you just lose thrust. So as one gets damaged, the plane can fly on the other engine perfectly fine, just suffering in some performance. The project eventually had to be canceled towards the end of the war, considering that the Allies literally overran the testing facility where it was being made. They ended up capturing two of the prototypes and taking them back to the US with them. The Air Force messed with them and tested them, and then eventually just sort of abandoned them in a lot of captured enemy airplanes, and they sat there until the mid-1950s, where the Smithsonian Institution stepped in and picked one of them up. Now, the other one was lost, but they managed to fully restore the final remaining airplane. That airplane now sits in the Udvar-Hazy Air and Space Museum in Chantilly, Virginia.